Good evening to all of you. Hope I'm audible. Good evening to all of you. I'm Anirudh from StackRoot. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on scalable machine learning on big data using Apache Spark. StackRoot is an NIIT venture. At StackRoot, we run disruptive IT learning solutions for professionals aspiring for technical leadership. As a learning partner in digital transformation, we work with several large IT organizations, product engineering organizations, and GIC. Coming to this webinar, I am Anirudh. I'll be a host for today's webinar. Robin will be the admin for the webinar, and the presenter would be Anirban. The duration of the webinar is 60 minutes. We would appreciate if you could keep your microphones on mute. We would love to answer all your questions through chat during the session, and you can also take them up post the session in the Q&A section. Please do participate in quick poll questions. All the poll questions will be conducted through AHA slides, and the link will be pasted in your chat window. In case you experience any connectivity issue, please message me at the given number. If you want me, we can just take a 2 minutes or 2 seconds to stop at the number if you want to make a note of it. Or if you want me to share that in the chat, would do the same. On behalf of StackRoot, we really wish you a great learning experience. Can we move to the next slide, Anil? The agenda for today is I will be doing the welcome, and from then Anirban will be directly taking up and completing working the webinar. Now I'd like to introduce the speaker, Anirban. Anirban is the chair data science and AI stack for StackRoot. He has 17 plus years experience in enterprise transformation analytics, and he is a founder of his own robotics edutech company in Bangalore, and as a certified Azure data scientist, and provides enterprise guidance for machine learning, big data, and Azure. It's a pleasure to have you, Anirban. Over to you.
Thank you, Anirudh. And good afternoon to all of you. Really excited and looking forward for this webinar. Before we start, a few quick word about the data science offering from StackRoot. As you can see in your slide, we have offering for corporates right from the foundation level to the leadership level and across the state-of-art craftsmanship, be it in a functional role, architect role, engineering or development role. We also cater to domain-specific data science tracks, be it from the financial, marketing, or even healthcare segment. So that's our offering in terms of data science. We also have our product manager, Robin from us, who would be sharing the links of some of our courses, especially the one which you are talking today. And all of you, I would request you to have a look. This slide talks about some of our customers with whom we work. So let's get into the topic of discussion, and we'll be talking about machine learning with big data and Spark. But let's start with something interesting, and this is in relationship to what is happening in the enterprise today in general. Now, back in 1982, there was a actual treasure hunt which was started by a gentleman, and it was called The Secret. And in this gentleman, they had put 12 boxes of treasures, actual treasures, in various secret locations in US and Canada. And till date, only 3 has been found, till 2019. And there is a Wikipedia article on it. All of you can go and read. And this is a very interesting aspect of treasure hunting. Now, why I am talking about treasure hunting in a big data and ML kind of a technical thing, it comes to what I see in the Databricks FAQ. Databricks, this is very interesting because I pulled out from them, and they say that, we want to be the hero who wants to drive out the secrets of the business that we are working at. And it's not just, spending your time with the tools, but being a detective and trying to find, where there is gold in the data. And then we all heard that data is the new oil, and this one talks about being data as gold. And all of us in our roles of enterprise engineers, architects, product developers, we are actually hunting gold into our estate of data. So I think that's an interesting anecdote, and all of you can go and read about this treasure hunting. Now, big data timeline, because we do webinars on this particular series, and this is one of the many webinars we do. And this is big data timeline in our zone of interest of the key technologies, and which will probably set up the foundation in terms of this webinar. Now, it all started with Hadoop somewhere in 2005, when there was an algorithm written as MapReduce, which changed the way in which distributed storage and processing and big data in general came into being. And then in 2009, there was a researcher in UC Berkeley in the US who put forward a very fascinating research paper on RDD. And they said that, how RDD could be better in comparison with MapReduce. So the comparison was with RDD and MapReduce. This group of folks, and some of them eventually from 2009, they became entrepreneurs and started a product and a company called as Databricks somewhere during this timeline. And as you know, today it's one of the zero management cloud platform which is built around Spark. And in between, you also had data lake concepts coming in, and Delta Lake in 2010 and 19. Now, these two things we talk in a different webinar, which are our data lake and Delta Lake series of webinar. But I'll be putting, if I have time, I'll put it as a living concept. But in today's discussion, we'll be majorly focusing on this two aspects of it, and we'll also do a brief comparison with MapReduce in general. All right. Now, one thing to note is that people who are starting out, and due to the buzzword in the internet, often people think that one technology has replaced other. That's not the case, which means that when you are using Databricks, you can still use Hadoop within that Databricks, which means that part of the Hadoop is very well alive, and it's very much relevant. It's not a question of A replacing B and B replacing C. That makes it very interesting and challenging at the same time, because you now have a problem of plenty, and that's the reason we structure this in this slide using the big data timeline. And as I said, I'll be talking primarily on these three areas in today's webinar. All right, now just to make it interesting, because this is online, I cannot see all of you. We have poll, and it also gives me a flavor of the audience so that I can, tailor my discussion as I move in, because every webinar the participants are different. So Anirudh, could you please release the first flow, and Anirudh will be releasing the poll. It would be a basic question with 4 or 5 options. Just select the options and Anirudh will share the results. Anirudh, could you share the first poll, please?
So the first poll is released. What is your current experience level with Apache Spark? As of now, we've received responses from 2 people.
So
would
just
appreciate
30 seconds more and you can tell it in terms of percentage.
Yes. Just in case, to just it, the AHA Slides link has been pasted in the chat window. You can just click on that link. It will directly take you to the question.
Yeah, I would highly encourage to do you. There are just 4 polls in this webinar. It makes you, keeps you interactive, and it gives a response back to me as I am talking. So, and it will just take 1 second. It's just one click.
10 more seconds. Yes, Anirban. So the options which were there, using it for client project, no one has answered. 50% of the people have answered have a basic hands-on with Spark, and the remaining 50% have answered, heard about it, but no real life experience.
Excellent. Thank you, Aniruddha. That's brilliant. We invested 10 seconds into it, but now I have a very decent idea about the participants, and it helps me tailor a part of my presentation. And as we see that 50% of the participants have heard something about it, and the rest have done some kind of basic POC. And I could say that that's a good thing, because this webinar, I think you will have a lot of takeaways and insights. All right. Now, the challenge in today's enterprise, other than digging out gold from the enterprise, which is eventually the end goal, is if you look at the current as is, it is very complex. As you can see, this metro rail. Now you can map it to a physical technical model for your servers. It can be a network diagram. It can also be your business process, or it can be also your data models talking into each other. And it's very complex, which goes in and which goes out. It's very difficult to understand unless you have spent so much time into an organization. Now, when I talk about enterprise, I'll keep on using this word enterprise. I need massive companies, companies who have turnover in billions, and may probably has employees, or 1 lakh to 3 lakhs kind of a thing. So when I say of enterprise, I mean massive companies. So generally, your customers would be from the enterprise side. And if you look at their landscape today, be it on the data side, be it on the business process side, it's a mess of things. Now, that is the challenge which you have. And the expectations out of project is that, it should be strong and scalable, like this elephant, which means that it stands for being robust. And, you should have, it should be lightning fast, like this rocket. So this adds complexity, because you are on one side of the equation, you're trying to find out what is your data source and what is your target and how they are moving, what is the structure of my data. And on top of that, the expectation one is, to make it, large, scalable and very robust. And the expectation two is it has to be lightning fast. So that's one challenge which we see in the enterprise today. Now, park your thoughts on that particular challenge. And since this cohort, all of you are starting out, I presume, from the poll, and that's the reason I'll spend some time on this particular slide. And often we see people talk about Hadoop versus Spark. That, okay, for the sake of argument, you can talk, but the actual point of discussion which you should understand is the difference between MapReduce and RDDs when you are entering into this domain of big data. Now, if I ask you to explain A plus B whole square, all of you will be able to explain how it works and what is the value, because we'll just break it, and we call it behind the napkin kind of a calculation. So if I give you a tissue paper and a pen, you can explain me A plus B whole square. But if I ask you to explain MapReduce, I'm sure that many of you have read it in blog, over internet, watched YouTube video, and then the problem is we read it, and after a week, we forget what it was. Comment up in the chat if you agree with me that, you keep on reading about MapReduce, how it works, and we keep on forgetting it. It's not so simple as A plus B whole square. If you have tried to read a book, they use mathematical notations like this, and that's the reason I'll be giving you a very simple example, and after which you will be able to do the back of the napkin calculation, even for RDDs like this. So imagine you have a file with 3 rows of data, which is here, here, and here. The first step when you're doing MapReduce, you split it by rows. That's not a big deal. You can do it in any programming language, which means you split it by lines. So here is one split, here is one split, and here is one split. And then you do a map. By map, you mean that you count the number of A's. How many A's are there? 2 A's are there. So you put 2. How many C is there? It's 1. Similarly, it's 1 each out in this segment, and again 1 each in this segment. So that's the first part of MapReduce, the map part of MapReduce. Then you have an operation called as shuffling, which means that they organize all the A together, the B together, the C together, and the D together. Okay, and if you organize all the A together, B together, and C together, you would have something like this. Note that, to do a shuffling, you have to move between each blocks, right? And that's why, you don't have to be a genius to understand that this particular process is more resource intensive and complicated, because you have to shuffle across the multiple blocks which you see here. And the final part is the reduce, in which you just whatever is your function. Example, if you're counting, you do 2 plus 1, 1 plus 1 plus 1, and 1 plus 1. That gives you the value here. And finally, this gives you the result in terms of a MapReduce function, which is trying to do an addition. All right. Now, there are three main aspects of it, which is the map part of it, the resource intensive shuffling part of it, and the reduce part of it. All right. So these operations were actually getting done in the MapReduce Hadoop thing when you were trying to do your big data engineering. Most of it was using this particular flow of data, depending on the calculations which you were doing, and shuffling used to take time. The majority of the data processing and everything was done primarily on disk. So there was an IO operation also. The overhead of IO operation was also there. Now, when it came to Spark, they tried to do something which is better than MapReduce, because MapReduce worked. It definitely worked, but they wanted to make something more better out of it, more faster, more scalable. So they used a data structure which is a DAG graph, direct accelerated graph, and in data structure it actually means that it is directed, which means it's a vector, and it has a direction, as you can see from here to here. And acyclic means that there are no loops, which means if you see each of these nodes, suppose you are reading a sensor data and you are separating the data by sensor type, a very elementary business process, you can see that the storing data is not looping back to separation here, or there is no loop back from here to here, which means once you have taken the data, it flows in one direction. And that's the reason, because RDDs, when they wrote RDD using DAG, they wanted to keep the lineage of the data, data from where it came. And the lineage could be used for calculation much faster inside the memory than MapReduce. They also parallelly introduced a concept called as data parallelism. And this gives a mathematical expression, but I'll give you a simple example of data parallelism. Imagine I have 10 books, and imagine all the books are of same volume, 200 pages. And here is you, and I ask you to read all these 10 books. And then assuming each books take 2 days to read, you will take 2 into 10, which is 20 days to read. So that's a lot of time. And then I devise a theory saying that, instead of asking you to read 10 books, I divide the book in a group of your colleagues of 5. Okay, and then I say that after you have read your book, you share your lessons in social media, so that you can quickly grasp without reading the book. So the time taken will get divided, correct? It will take 1/5 of the time that then it was taking, because I have divided the work. So that is more or less the concept of data parallelism, in which you have an n block of data, and if you have 4 blocks, you can do multiple processing of the data, and the data can be operated in parallel, and that gives you the speed of the rocket which was coming in, because you can also do it over the memory. So those were the essential difference which RTDs got in terms from MapReduce. So that's one concept you need to keep in mind. The other thing was, there was a boom in the world of REPL languages, and REPL means read, evaluate, print, and loop. And if you have used the Jupyter notebook over Python, that's a perfect example of REPL language, which means that you can draw lines of code, and you can see the illustration and the graph maybe. Again, you can go and write more lines of code, and you can see the illustrations change, because it is interactive kind of a programming language. Now, what used to happen, if I'm talking about 2010, people used to write their data science program, especially the data scientists, because they wanted to change and experiment a lot, and they were using a language like Python, which was REPL. But when they took it to production, and when you had big data coming in and talking in complex business flow, they saw that this kind of languages are not well suited for production. At least it was not there in 2010. They had to rewrite the code again in a language like Java, and make it production grade. So there was two work. One was writing it in a REPL language, and then moving that part of code in Java. So that was the problem there, because it was good for interactive programming patterns and discovery, but not good for production language as Java and C++. And then Apache Spark actually came and solved that problem, because they gave you the ability to code in any language you want, and then the Rocket because now they were using RDD and in-memory kind of computation because of the concepts of RDD, which allowed them to do it through DAG. And then you are able to take the advantage of both this world when you're using a platform like Apache Spark, because you had the option of REPL language, and then it was fast also because it now moves on a different kind of a architecture, which was the RDD. And then you also had add-in packages for machine learning, streaming, SQL, and also for graph processing, which were given as, Spark APIs, which means you can go and look at that the APIs and do your coding. So that was the advantage which Spark brought in, which in 2010 and all was not there. And that is the reason that Apache Spark became so prominently successful in projects. One thing to note that I kept on telling in-memory computing for Spark, that should not be confused with distributed memory sharing, which is something like this. And this is an academic concept. The main difference is that your RDDs are immutable, which means that once I create a RDD, so imagine I create an RDD1, and RDD looks something like that, and I do RDD1 plus RDD2, and I create RDD3. I cannot go and delete or change the content of RDD1 and RDD2. It is immutable. You cannot destroy it. But if you have to do something on a distributed sharing memory, you can do it, but you have to code for it. But this is inbuilt for RDDs. All right. So this is one advantage which RDD gave compared to distributed memory. There was also another concept of lazy transformation, and this is very interesting because it helped in effective scalability and performance issue, which means that imagine you are doing a programming like this: A is equal to 1, B is equal to 2, and C is equal to A plus B, which actually means 3 in this case. So if you're doing in Spark in RDD, it will not assign enough resource if you just go and allocating it, unless you call it, you do a print or you do some kind of action over it. It will not consume the resources, and that's the reason they said that Spark is lazily evaluated. So all the allocations you do for your programming or your mathematical calculation, it will not take so much resource unless you have asked explicitly for it. So to sum up, the Spark, this is the definition which is currently coming in, and this is an memory, which I said, and it is very fast. And traditionally, you had this map reduce flow coming in, but now with Spark, you can distribute the data. Imagine the example of book reading I gave. This is what it is shown in, and internally, every job you put it into the Spark, it gets divided into stages and tasks depending on the complexity of the work, and that makes it very efficient in terms of fast big data processing. Now, in case if you are interested, I have a couple of blogs on it, because this is just a 1 hour webinar. What is job, what is stage, when it moves from stage to job, those kind of concepts, intermediate concepts, are given in that blog. You can go and have a look at it. And this is the contest which was won again by 2014, in which Spark, they won this competition, and it's called the Gray Sort contest, in which 100 TB of data were asked for sorting. And as you can see, the time taken by Hadoop MapReduce was 72 versus 23 minutes for Spark, with the same 100 TB of data plus certain other parameters. And that's our famous rocket, just to show that, it is lightning fast. All right, now it's the time for the second poll. Anirudh, could you just release the second poll, and it will just take one mouse click again.
I'm sorry, I was speaking on mute. The link which was shared, if you can just refresh it once, it will show you go to slide, and you'll be able to see the question, why Spark is lightning fast. Yes, we started receiving responses. 30 seconds more. So Anirban, we are receiving responses. Currently, we have 25% of the responses for option D, which is both A and C. So I'll just call out the options just for reference. A is in-memory computing with lazy transform. B is lazy with lineage with DAC. C is does not use SQL. D is where we currently receive 20% people who say both A and C. And E, we have received 60% people who are saying both A and B.
Thank you, Anirudh. So well done. I think 60% of you got it right, which is A and B, because that's the two things we talked. And it also went to prove that, you learned some new things, at least at an initial level. Now, this things needs a lot of reading, all right? So if you want to understand more, how stages work, how lineage works, and I've given some examples, which is difficult in a webinar to address. You can go and read these two blogs which I have written exclusively under it. How does this worker node and the DAG work under the hood, and especially if you're interested in algorithms and more academic part of Spark. I think yeah, that will really help you, these two blogs. So when you get the slide, you can go and read in my blog. All right. Now,
Excuse me, Anirban. There's
yeah.
one question which has come out. What are the state-of-the-art tools, languages, or frameworks for scalable machine learning systems in production has been asked.
That's fine, Anirudh. I'll take it at the end. So let me cover the content first. One of them is Databricks, definitely, which you are covering, just to partly answer that question. All right. So let's move into the machine learning part. Now that I've briefly talked about Spark and RDD, and I introduced the elephant and the rocket concept, just to help you recall it, and also talked about MapReduce. Now, in machine learning process, if I do a very oversimplified steps in machine learning, is basically this four areas in which you do the data acquisition, from which you capture the data. There is data cleaning, because we know even in like most technology, you put garbage in, you will get garbage out. And then this is where actually the model development happens. This is the testing, and this is the deployment of the model that is happening. Now, depending on the stages, their roles are also getting defined. Example, this part is getting renamed as ML ops, a part of it, depending on the organization. And this is where you are building the model. So this is the data scientist kind of a layer, and this is the data engineering kind of a layer, again depending on the organization. So that's the flow that you need to keep in mind. And then we have Apache Spark. And as I said, that if you look at the major technologies, right from streaming to data lake, all of the big names are supported in the backend. Example, ETL. I'm sure that some of you come from ETL background. So Talent, Oracle, this is supported on the ETL side. Be it on the streaming side, you have Apache Storm getting supported, so on and so forth for data lake. Even for machine language learning, scikit-learn, this one is very common for starters, as a platform and an API to learn. So that is also supported. So it has a wide ecosystem of tools and platforms which are integrated, and there are also companies who are building up their own connectors for Spark. Even for analysis, as you can see, there is Tableau, there is Jupyter Notebook, which is supported. So it's not that it's just standalone kind of a technology or a platform. It is well integrated within the entire data suite depending, which area of data you can come and add your value into it. Generally, in machine learning, you have two areas of learning. One is supervised learning, and another is unsupervised learning. In supervised learning, you get data as labeled. In simple term, it means that, you know, imagine you need to predict some prices, and you have a spreadsheet, and one of the row is prices, and there are other attributes in it, in which, based on that, probably the price changes. So if you're trying to create a model of predicting values, you already have a data set which has past values of what you are trying to predict, in this case the dollar value. Then such a learning is called as supervised learning, which means that, the past values of such a process or instances, you already have. One is, predicting the price of a house, whether to know whether a credit card transaction was fraud or not fraud. And generally, they follow two three areas of classification, regression, and clustering. And you also have another thing, which is unsupervised learning, in which you do not have a data set which is correct. You at times even do not know what you want out of the data. You want to create a new dimension of data, and in that area you use something called as unsupervised learning, and Spark supports both of them. Now, some of you said that you have done some kind of POC, and especially if you have done data frames in Python and Pandas, just take a note, and this is a tip which I'm giving, that in Spark, when you are coding for Spark API, unlike data frames which you have on other packages, it just takes in this format, which is, features and labels format. So you have to map and need to format your data in features and level, and then input it into your mlib library, which is the library for machine learning. So there is little bit of tweak which is needed from other machine learning packages, as scikit-learn. This is a poll. I'll just skip it for the time being, keeping in mind the time in hand. The next thing which I want to talk about is pipelines, and pipelines are also an important concept when it comes into machine learning, because you don't only, imagine you created a model in Spark and this is your laptop, and you show it to your management, your supervisor, and they say it's lovely. Next, what, what next, what do? You have to put it in production, right? So that's one challenge. How do I put it in production? Then, maybe when you are doing something in your laptop, you have taken the data from Excel file, and it works lovely again with the Excel file. But in production, you probably have to take it from an ab initio server or a SQL server, and then you have to automate it. You probably have to put some trigger into it, right? Something happens. Imagine a fraud transaction is getting detected. Then what do? You just don't sit. You have to trigger an event. So these are all examples of, creating a pipeline. And creating a pipeline, when it comes to project level, big data, machine learning kind of a thing, it becomes very important. If not, when you're scaling for yourself, learning yourself, or doing some initial training and POCs, it might not be important. But when you're going at a project level, this is one thing, projects have something in mind, and you have to deliver the pipelines in machine learning. So as you can see, this is one example which is given from Azure pipelines, and it shows that, this is a pipeline which is created by an Azure component called as Data Factory, and it can ingest the data, store the data, it can do some data engineering, put the model, and then serve the model as, an API. And then this is your business, and they can, see it over their dashboard, whatever it is coming over, and this is where your machine learning is happening. All right, so this is one diagram that explains pipeline beautifully, and that's the reason I have used this particular thing. Now, when it comes to Spark as well, we have pipelines, and there are classes which are the APIs supports the pipeline, how it is framed, and you do have the transformer and the estimator classes, which helps you in creating that pipeline one after another. Example I'll give you, not only from moving from source to data, but also, doing basic data engineering. Imagine you have a data set, and it has, say, a lot of columns into it. All right, and imagine it has 100 columns into it. All right, 100 columns, and these are your columns. And the first three columns are categorical variables. Now, what do I mean by categorical variables? They are not numbers. They are saying good, rainy, tasty. And these words, they are very subjective. How do you rate tasty, rainy, good? One option is that, tasty, bad, tasty. You put a number like 0, 1, 2. 0 means bad, 1 means average, 2 means tasty, something like that. So you have to handle those categorical variables, because if you put such English words into your machine learning model, the model will not work, because machine learning models, they understand numbers, they don't understand alphabet. So that's one area where you can do your pipeline transformation. Example, now if you have to do it one at a time, so for each, imagine 3 out of 100 columns have such categorical variables, then you have to write a piece of code for first changing this, changing this, changing this, and then combining it, right? But if you do it in a pipeline, you can do a series of code which will first change this, this, and this in one shot. So that is one example. In pipeline, not only categorical variables, you can do that classical, date month conversion, which means that you have DD, YY, and this needs to be changed to YYYY, DD, And maybe you have another 7 dates filled in this. And do you change it one at a time? No, you can put it in a pipeline which does both this kind of conversion in one shot. So your code becomes very optimized and is very performance oriented. So that is another example where you use pipelines, all right? And this is quite handy because the codes are well documented, and you can go and see yourself the APIs, follow some examples, and do it yourself. All right. Now I'll try to show you one, because it makes sense if I try to demo you one such pipeline. All right. Now this product which I am using, because there was already a question on what is the product that I can use. And in case you have not seen this before, I'm using Databricks, and the first slide I talked about Databricks. It comes from, a part of the team is from the creators and founders of Apache Spark. It runs Spark at the backend, and it supports all kinds of storage, compute, whatever you need. It also comes with a free community edition, and as you can see, I am using a community edition on this. All right, now here it gives you a lot of advantage. Let me first talk about this Databricks, because that partly answers one of the questions which has already come. First of all, you can go and create your clusters, your backend server on which you will be running your code, and you can just go and click on create cluster. It will give you the options to choose your Spark version. Since this is free, they are just giving me 15 gigs of memory, and that is actually more equivalent, if not more powerful, than most of the laptops we are using right now as I speak. So doing your proof of concept, I think this is more than enough. Obviously, for projects, you need the professional grade. And then also you can add your data. For example, for training purpose, you can go and upload your files. You can browse and give your update files, and it will upload your file. And in case you need to integrate with, for example, Amazon S3 and other data sources, like, these are the options it gives you. See, Redshift, Kinesis, JDBC, Kafka. So example, if you have a SQL server, you can drop your JDBC here and connect it. And there are also third-party, integration, which may be free, maybe demo, or maybe totally paid, depending on the integration you want to do. So generally, for your starting point, you can use this file system, and this, whenever you upload a file, this gets locally uploaded into your file store, which is your DBFS, which is your Databricks file system, and you can see your files here. All right, now back to what I was talking about in terms of drawing up a pipeline. Now here is one example, and this is a pipeline example from Spark. And it's quite easy, and this follows a normal process in which I create my own data set here in the first part of the code, because it's just a webinar. So I'm taking some dummy data and creating the data, and then I configure the pipeline. And this is what probably you saw in the slide when I was talking about tokenizer and the transformer class. Okay, you have to define, what you want within that pipeline to come, and then you apply the algorithm. In this case, this is logistics regression, and once you have applied it into the logistics regression algorithm, you just fit it, and whatever you want to print, you can print it in the subsequent text. So here I have just chosen these four fields out of it in the pipeline, and I have delivered it in the pipeline, and as you can see that it has come out here. So if I had to handle it like changing categorical variables and things like that, I could have incorporated that logic also. So you don't have to do it for each column. So you can take it on the fly using the Apache Spark pipeline. All right. The other thing which I want to talk is what is the difference between Databricks and Spark, because that again answers partly the question that came in. What is one tool that I can learn? My answer would be Databricks, and this has some differences. I said that Databricks runs Spark in the backend, but what are the other things you get when you use Databricks? Now, when I was starting in big data and I was using Apache Spark, it used to be the biggest problem in learning data science. I think the biggest problem in learning data science from this part was, to get big data installed in your laptop. And this probably created a hype in buying high performance laptop. People were buying RAM left, right, and center, upgrading a 8 GB laptop into 32 GB, and trying that luck. I also remember that a lot of startups came during this era, who are providing lab on a time basis just to practice for big data certification. Now that entire headache is totally gone with Databricks, because you can get up and running with Apache Spark in as less as 10 minutes. All right. So that's, I think, a major plus if you're trying to do a POC in your project, or getting to skilled yourself. Okay. Now Databricks, as I said, it's a product, and it is supported both on Azure and AWS. So you will have Azure Databricks also, AWS also. So depending on where your organization is aligned, or your performance personal preference, you can use it through the cloud, or you can use the community edition also, which I was using just to show you. Now, when you use Databricks in your projects, it gives you certain advantages which are not given in bespoke installation of Spark, like, running multiple Spark version. This becomes important for a mid-scale project, because, in certain algorithms, certain version of Spark may work, in certain version, certain will not work. You could also have different kind of analysis. One team can be doing analysis with data, like I said, rows and columns kind of a thing, structured data, and in another team can be working with videos and things like that. So you need multiple Spark versions and instances, which is very easy to do with Databricks. It's a mouse click actually. But if you try to do it with Spark standalone, you have to install two different server, server 1 and server 2, and then get it. Built-in file system, this is what I showed you, right? Various integrations which is possible. So you can integrate it with Amazon AWS S3 or an Azure Blob. It has features like automatic caching. You don't have to take care of caching. Your team can share the same cluster together in the same go. Tableau has become such a a widely used product. Integration with Tableau is given within the box. Workflow, job alerts, and then obviously if you're going with cloud, your project and your customer is also getting the enterprise security and support. Example, if you were here, security and patching of the server, the hardening of the server was your responsibility. But here you are getting it as a service. So these are the options that Databricks gives you, and that's the reason, if you look at the website of Databricks, it's a unified stack. That's the term which they are using, and it's all in one place. So you have multi-cloud, which means Azure and AWS both are giving it. Then you have the runtime engine, which supports packages in big data and machine language world, also file formats like the PARQ file format, which is used in big data. And then also you have the ML flow algorithm, which I talked very briefly at a very high level. And the API of ML flow supports most of the machine learning algorithms that you would be using. And that's the reason it is a completely unified stack, because it adds everything and gives you a collaborative workspace which you can share with your colleagues in different roles. Because today the data science project does not just have data scientists, it's a combination of multiple roles. And then if all this headache is gone from your kitty, because it's platform as a service, and you can focus on your core work, which is data science and data engineering, or data in general, rather than focusing on when my cluster and what is the antivirus I need to give in my server, when will my server go up, go down. It's just click of a button. You can have multiple instances of CPU and GPU, which I said. And so these are the various advantages which Databricks gives you. And I would recommend all of you to have a look at Databricks. I am approaching towards the end of my webinar, and I would like to leave with you with a couple of pointers. One would be that what is the architecture that is happening. So there are a lot of architecture which has come in big data, like Lambda architecture, cup architecture. So I have to just talk about the Lambda architecture which is there. And this is interesting because when you are working with big data in general, with the event of IoT and social media, your streaming data has become also important. All right, imagine a call center. Okay, call center is a good example. So imagine your customer is a call center and you have to do some kind of a big data over it. So there are two facets in a call center kind of a industry. One facet is actually the agent talking with the customer live. So that call is getting recorded. So that is one example of streaming data. And then there is data which is master data in general, or any other data which is static. So if you have to do a machine learning algorithm, you might have to combine both these two data, and you need a robust architecture for both of these things. And then Lambda architecture comes from the letter Lambda, as I drew, and one would be for streaming and one would be for batch, and you can integrate it at this particular point, as it is shown that you have a speed layer and you have a batch layer, and this is the Lambda of the Lambda architecture. And as usual, you can implement it over AWS, you can implement it over Azure. Both of them supports this kind of architecture. You have to choose the right components. And as shown here that, this platform is supported on both, and you can use Apache Spark as the big data technology using this particular architecture. Obviously, with data lake, other architectures like Delta architecture came in. But as I said, that is for a different webinar, where and I say what were the limitations of Lambda architecture and where Delta architecture in a sort of a way mitigates those kind of scenarios. So I think that brings me to an end, because I have to leave some time for Q&A, and I have 7 to 10 minutes left for the Q&A. Thank you so much. I know it was short, but I hope I was able to cover some insights and at least open the corridors in which you can go after this webinar, take some action, do some Googling, and start your R&D on it. I would love to answer your questions. You can pop it in the Q&A, and Anirudh, if you'd be so kind to read it out for me. So over to you, Anirudh.
Thank you, Anirban. I'm just reading out the questions. Would love your answers to them. So one, I think at the different junctures of the webinar you've covered, what are the state of the art tools, languages, frameworks for scalable machine learning systems in production? I think more or less you've answered that in different sections. So moving to the next question is, can you share a few use cases of Delta Lake
All right.
in terms of enterprise level implementations of sorts?
Yeah. So I'll answer both the questions actually. Although I answered Anirudh, you were spot on. I answered the question, but I get another variety of the first question that should I learn Python or Scala? Okay. Now, you ask this question to 10 different people who are there in the industry, and probably will get 2-3 different answers. So here is my thing, and I'm not trying to be idealistic kind of a thing. I'll tell you real project from my interaction with multiple customers where this difference comes in. Ideally, if I think as a user, as a professional myself, not my role for my customer, what is easy for me. Now, generally, with my coaching experience with professionals, I've seen that people who come from background of Java and .NET, all right, or any code-based technology where they have been coding substantially, all right. I think they would find Scala more intuitive to pick in, all right. So that's one way you can think about it, because especially if you are coming from Java, this should be a cakewalk if you are a Java kind of a programmer. But if you also came from .NET kind of a thing, I think I would recommend you to start using Scala. Python is somebody who has come from package software kind of a background, like CRM, ERP, Siebel, kind of a thing. There is no thumb rule. I mean, you can have a CRM guy who codes excellently in Java. I'm just talking in general, my observations, all right? Because it's not that a CRM or an ERP guy cannot code, but if you compare the volume of code, these two professionals would have coded in their years of experience of 0 to 10 years. For sure, I think most of you will agree that if this pillar has coded more than this pillar, because here a major part of the work is also in configurations, right? There is a lot of config work which happens in CRM, ERP kind of a space. And here the code is very heavy. So that's one way, just from an individual point of view. If you look at a project point of view, I think I've seen most of the projects eventually end up using both. And especially if you have a SLA driven business process where it is business critical in terms of time and performance, definitely you have to go with Scala kind of a thing. Data scientists, they prefer to be in this zone, all right? So that's the first part of the question. So I think depending on the situation, please start, don't procrastinate. If you think that, Python is easier for you, go and learn Python. If Scala is easier for you, depending on your background, go and learn Scala, all right? But if you are a Java guy, please move to go and read Scala. It should be a cakewalk for you. All right, the next question was on data lake and data lake use case. Although, as I said that, it's covered in a different webinar, and Robin might be sharing, if you're registered and subscribed, you would get an invite of such webinars happening in the next few months. I do webinars on data lake and delta lake. Now, one problem which was happening when it came to data lake was, people came and created a data lake, say in 2014, because it was a buzzword, and there was no buy-in from business. And what happened was that it was not getting used, and it was not having proper governance. That is one area. Okay, data governance in general maybe was missing, and data lake got converted into a data swamp. All right, data swamp is a place where you have stagnant water. The water is unfit for consumption. So here is a perfect use case of delta lake, because delta lake comes in and gives you a default governance layer, which means that as data is getting ingested, you have layers like the bronze layer, the silver layer, the gold layer, and the platinum layer. And as you move from left to right, your data quality, which is your quality of data, improves. So that is one use case where Delta Lake comes in and improves your overall data quality and governance by implementing the Delta framework. The other use case is, in big data and in machine learning, the asset transaction, which you have in classical databases, that becomes very important. And they enforce these asset transactions over the data in general. It is enforced, so a programmer cannot bypass it. So that is also another advantage which Delta Lakes gives. Now, again, it was superficial, because this is addressed totally in a completely different webinar, which I do, and Robin might send you invite substantially in the days to come. Yeah. Next question, please, Anirudh.
Anirban, this is also a question which you've answered in a form. It was asked a little before, was why MNCs are migrating from Hadoop to cloud computing, AWS and S3. I think you've touched upon it. If you would want to add anything more on that, I would
Yeah, I think Hadoop, yes, there are certain tools because when you look at Hadoop in 2010, Hadoop had a lot of tools and plugins, technologies. In fact, I remember that in my study room, I had a printout color. I had taken a color printout of Hadoop tools because the names were all new, and I used to quickly see, no, which what it does. Because when I was starting, I used to get confused. What is Pig? What is Yarn? What is ZooMaker? All those things. Now, some of these are not getting used, but remember, in certain cases, HDFS I see getting used. HDFS customers are still keeping. The reason they are probably migrating from towards Spark is obviously the advantage that RDD gives it. Then Databricks coming in with such a unified stack. Then the cloud players, the cloud players, both, all the major cloud players adopting it. There you see use cases which are running in production using Databricks and Apache Spark in the backend, and then the agility, both have triggered, and then bespoke, the bespoke integration which I talked about. So multiple reasons have triggered, but in any ways, do not think that Hadoop is dead. So I think it's definitely not dead, and I see a lot of customer still using HDFS, which is fine. What has got replaced is actually MapReduce has got replaced with the core RDD kind of a framework. So that's one change. Yes, Anirudh, next question, please.
Nirvan, can you shed a little light on PySpark? RDD in Spark is what it was highlighted as.
Yeah. So PySpark, which is PySpark is Python plus Spark, Python with Spark, which is the PySpark. So it just tells you that you can run Python over Spark. Now, if you have to use ML using Python, you have to add a library to it, and that is called as mlib. Okay. Now, when you're starting with machine learning in general, participants or people, they take two approach, all right, depending on their background. Now, one kind of guy, so this is guy one. He or she might take an approach saying that I'll do machine learning. The target is to learn machine learning algorithms. Okay. And here this particular participant, gentleman or lady one, is not too bothered about the scale and volume of the data. So his or her focus is to learn machine learning, ignoring the facets of volume, veracity, velocity, whatever v's you can add for big data. And generally, people start with Python, and they use a library called as scikit-learn. Okay, because scikit-learn is heavily documented. There are a lot of online resources, books on it, and stuff there. So here you do not need mlib. Okay, now you might have another person. Okay, person two. Now his or her requirement in terms of skilling is that I need to learn machine learning, but my data for machine learning should be compatible with big data. So they want to do two-in-one kind of a approach, all right? Or they are actually data professionals who have a good interest in big data, or they know big data. They do not know ML part of it. They know big data. They could have been big data engineer or administrator. Now they want to skill. In such a case, if you try to use scikit-learn, it's not a good idea because it's not a framework for big data. You have to use PySpark, and within PySpark, you use the library mlib. Okay, so that's how the interaction goes, depending on the use.
Thank you, Anirban. Last question, which is there. Can you shed some light on hashing TF?
Hashing TF, the example which I gave, that's at a very high level. What I'll do is that when you get the link, I'll put a link for hashing TF for the pipeline. Okay, so I'll add that, and when Robin or Anirudh sends it, you will get a link which will explain more about hashing TF in general.
Anirban, these were the questions which we had. If anybody has any further questions, feel free to raise your hand. We'll just give them 5 more seconds. Yes. Yes, Anirban. We don't have any further questions. Firstly, I would like to thank you for your time and sharing your invaluable knowledge with all of us. It's been a great learning experience. And I would also like to thank our audience and the attendees who've been absolutely spectacular in asking different kinds of questions based on whatever they've been facing. Thank you all for being a part of this webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.